We throw around the word good all the time, a good person, a good movie, a good cup of coffee. But what are we actually talking about when we use that word? Are we pointing to something real, something objective out there in the universe, a feature that exists whether we're around or not? Or are we just talking about our own pleasant feelings? That distinction right there is the core question we are going to dig into today.
So let's ground this with a quick thought experiment. Picture a truly heroic act of forgiveness. Something really profound. When we witness that, we get this feeling, right? A sense of awe, of rightness. Now, here's the question. Is that feeling a response to a quality that is actually in the act itself? Or is the word goodness just the label we slap onto our own emotional reaction? This is the central problem we have to unravel.
So, this slide really just lays out the two big camps here. On one side, you have what you could call moral realism, the idea that goodness is an objective feature of reality, kind of like gravity. It's just there. And on the other side, you've got moral subjectivity, the idea that goodness is really just a matter of taste, of preference, of pleasure. Our mission today is to build a solid, rigorous case for that objective view. All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start with a really powerful tool for analyzing experience. It's called phenomenology. We're going to use it to draw this absolutely crucial distinction between value and satisfaction. Then we'll see how that insight actually lines up beautifully with a much older classical metaphysical framework. And finally, we'll explore what this all means, the really profound ethical implications of everything we find. Okay. So our investigation is going to kick off with the philosopher Dietrich von Hildebrand. He had this brilliant idea that before we start building all these abstract theories about what goodness is, we first have to do a really rigorous, honest examination of our own lived experience. And this methodical approach, well, that's what's known as phenomenology. Now, it's so important to get this right. This isn't just, sitting around and thinking about your feelings. Phenomenology is a demanding discipline. It asks us to put our pre-existing theories and our biases in brackets. Just set them aside for a moment, so we can describe the essential structures of an experience exactly as it presents itself to us. It's a method for seeing what's really there. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because when Hildebrand applies this method to our experience of the important, he finds something huge. He argues that we actually encounter two totally different kinds of importance in the world, what he calls value and the subjectively satisfying. Okay, so first up, the subjectively satisfying. This is stuff whose importance is completely dependent on us. It's important because it pleases us, because it scratches an itch or fulfills a desire. And our own language kind of gives the game away here, right? We say something is agreeable to me or satisfying for you. Its importance is always relative to a person. For instance, a compliment is important to us. A warm bath feels good to our body. A profitable business deal is good for our bank account. In every single one of these cases, if you take away the personal pleasure or the benefit, well, the importance just vanishes. Now, in complete, stark contrast to this is value. Value is an importance that a thing has in and of itself. It doesn't matter if we recognize it. It doesn't matter if it pleases us. Its importance is intrinsic. It's autonomous. It really doesn't need us to be important. Hildebrand's point here is just so powerful. The sublimity of a truly charitable act, or the staggering beauty of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, that isn't just a private feeling. We experience those qualities as belonging to the things themselves. They are sublime. They are beautiful, period. They aren't just sublime or beautiful for us. So you might be thinking, okay, that's a nice idea, but how do we know this distinction is real and not just something we're making up? Well, Hildebrand argues that the proof is in the experience itself. He points to 4 really clear marks, or characteristics, that show the massive difference between when we encounter a real value and when we're just chasing satisfaction. Let's break down the first 2. First, just think about the nature of the delight. The joy you get from encountering a value, like an act of real courage, it's deep, it's blissful, it kind of elevates you. But the pleasure from satisfaction, like eating a tasty dessert, is nice, sure, but it's fundamentally self-centered. Second, look at the source of importance. It's completely flipped. With value, the thing's own intrinsic worth is the principium, the source, the principle, that causes our response. With satisfaction, our own pleasure is the principial. The object is just a means to an end. Third, notice the character of our response. When we encounter a true value, we feel a kind of reverence. We conform ourselves to it. But with satisfaction, we just try to get it for ourselves.
We conform the object to our needs. And finally, and this one is huge, look at how we rank them. We talk about values in a hierarchy. We say courage is a higher good than simple politeness, but we describe pleasures on a scale. One meal might be more satisfying than another. You can't just pile up more and more greater pleasure and somehow arrive at a higher value. They are just qualitatively different kinds of importance.
Now here's where it gets really mind-blowing. Hildebrand's super careful analysis of our experience, it lines up perfectly with a much, much older tradition that talks about the fundamental structure of reality itself, classical metaphysics. See, this isn't some brand new idea. The insight that goodness is a real, objective feature of the world is a cornerstone of classical philosophy, especially in the work of someone like Thomas Aquinas. And he had a special name for concepts like this, the transcendentals. So what in the world are transcendentals? Well, think of them as properties that go beyond all the normal categories because they apply to everything that exists. For a thinker like Aquinas, wherever you find being, wherever you find existence, you will also find unity, truth, and, you guessed it, goodness. They're like different facets of the same diamond, reality itself. And this leads to Aquinas' really famous statement, being and good are convertible. They're two sides of the same coin. In other words, to the extent that something exists, it is good. Now, this doesn't mean evil isn't real. Of course not. But it defines evil not as a thing in itself, but as a privation, a lack of a good that ought to be there. Kind of like how blindness isn't a thing, but a lack of sight. Fundamentally for Aquinas, just to exist is good. And this goodness exists in a kind of hierarchy. A stone is good insofar as it's a good stone. It fully actualizes its stoneness. But an animal has a greater degree of being. It's alive, it has sensation, so it has a greater ontological goodness. And a human being with reason and understanding has a still greater share in being, and is therefore, ontologically speaking, even better. This isn't a moral judgment, it's a metaphysical one about the fullness of existence. Okay, so we've seen how two completely different paths, Hildebrand's phenomenology and classical metaphysics, both lead to the same conclusion. Goodness is a real objective feature of reality. So that brings us to the big one, the crucial question. So what? Why does this matter? I mean, really, if we accept this conclusion, it completely changes how we see ourselves and our place in the universe. It has massive, profound implications for how we're supposed to live our lives. Well, first, it means values aren't just something we create out of our feelings. They're something we perceive with our reason and our intuition. Second, these objective values, they make a claim on us. The beauty of Beethoven's Ninth demands admiration. An act of profound injustice demands condemnation. They call for a response that is due to them, and that, in turn, gives us a solid, reality-based foundation for ethics that isn't just about shifting opinions. And finally, it means our moral choices aren't just arbitrary. They either put us in sync with, or in opposition to, the very structure of being itself. So ultimately, this reframes the whole moral project. Ethics is no longer about just constructing a system of our own preferences. It's about developing the clarity of vision to actually perceive the value that is objectively present in the world, in people, in actions, in art, in nature, and then cultivating the freedom to give it the response that it truly deserves. And that leaves us with a final orienting thought. A subjective view of the world just asks, what do I happen to want? But an objective view of goodness challenges us with a much, much deeper question. What in reality is actually worthy of our desire, worthy of our love, and ultimately worthy of our lives?